cheapest way to produce energy. They are creating jobs and improving gender balance. It's possible to mobilize financial resources for the change. In response to the Secretary General call for action, ARENA, C4All and UNDP, in coordination with the GCF and with the lead support of Denmark, announced the climate investment platform yesterday. The platform will be inclusive, well-articulated, proactive, and agile in supporting SIDS and the other developed countries to review and implement their ambitious NDCs and facilitate the private sector engagement to accelerate the energy transition and scale up low-carbon resilient economic future. I've been honored today with you, leaders of the SIDS. We all have to do more. ARENA is ready.
Thank you so much. Profoundly grateful to everyone's participation. Thank you. We've reached the end of this portion of the program. I want to thank all of our presenters that we've heard from today. The Climate Action Summit will continue here in the General Assembly Hall at 3 p.m. sharp. Thank you. Okay.
No for an S. last 4 years were the hottest on record. If warming levels were to reach 2 degrees Celsius or more, it would be catastrophic. We have the blueprints, the frameworks and the plans. What we need is urgency, political will and ambition. The Climate Action Summit will be an opportunity for countries to scale up their pledges so that we can stop the increase in emissions by 2020 and dramatically reduce emissions to reach net zero by mid-century. My messages to governments around the world are clear. First, shift taxes from salaries to carbon. Second, stop subsidizing fossil fuels. Third, stop building new coal plants by 2020. We need to mobilize the solidarity and support of the international community for your sustainable development to become a vibrant reality.
Ntol funding ki wa ko lale pour ntol fanan na suto bulo pour asila fa domandi tegi fi gay ntol kay ntela jeroro ilafta mol ma ko la bagale adum be men duwaka ila mira kendo alama ay yirwa komen ntela doko men woron cycle dara ñin tegi fi mol ma koy cycle joran la wolom kolewol kata sirawol ina tasol ñinga wol soto bajela ko ntol fanan na doko surtout ntol funding kewol abe mol ma ko la bakle mecho ñi abe ganaw yiru wala abe sembo fanan soto lale adu abe yurtor fanan mo jama fanan ñaatini la ñi métier doko.
Hi, I'm Ben, and I'm here to tell you about the Flip Floppy project.
Have you heard the latest from Lamu?
They're building a boat.
They're building a boat from plastic.
Here in Lamu on the Kenya coast, we collected over 33 tons of plastic waste on this 10-kilometre stretch of beach. It suddenly struck me, what if we could use all this waste plastic and build something impressive to create awareness globally of plastic pollution? It seemed like a crazy idea at the time, but what if Ali and his team could recycle all this plastic waste and use it to build a traditional sailing dhow? And then we could sail it down the coast of East Africa, stopping at villages along the way, to demonstrate how we can turn trash into treasure, instead of throwing plastic away.
A dhow is a traditional sailing boat here in Lamu. They used to go to Arabia, to India in the time before. Now we are doing a recycled plastic dhow.
When the plastic comes to us, we put in our big crushing machines. We crush about 2-3 tons a day. And then we put it into our wash bins and we wash them, and then we dry them, and then we put it into a big melting machine. And that's poured into the molds. The molds now create the pieces of the dhow.
Any boat here, plastic.
Plastic? Really?
Each rib is 1 tree. By making this dhow out of plastic, we are saving also the forest. And these are planks, also made of recycled plastic.
All these flip-flops, I have collected them from the beach. After I have gotten this pattern, then I'll get to glue them together.
As you can see, Little Flip Floppy, our test boat, is about to be launched. To make the 5,000-kilometre journey to South Africa, we need to build a boat twice this size. And look, we've already started, and it's huge. We're asking for donations of $10, $20, or $50. And if you'd like to donate more, then please ask your friends, family, co-workers, everyone to get involved. When we reach our target, we'll use the funds to turn 60 tons of ocean trash into a boat big enough to reach all 4 corners of the globe. And that is what will kickstart the plastic revolution worldwide.
You can be part of the plastic revolution.
Let's make it happen.
The plastic revolution.
من أول كان يعني المطر يشتكي يعني ماشي لمعانا طربال ولا قال له والله لا حلفتاني بالله العظيم إني أحتضن أولادي وأبكي، أحتضن زوجتي وأحتضن أطفالي.
UNHCR has chosen this type of shelter because this shelter is the best shelter to suitable with the environment of Abs.
تقدر تتحكم بالتهوية حقه، يعني في الصيف تفتح، في الشتاء وفي البرد تقفل. الحمد لله اليوم يعني بعد ما حصلنا على الوحدات السكنية هي المعاناة الماضية تعتبر انتسل.
It is transitional. What we mean transitional, it can be moved away to another location. Those materials can be reused again. It gives them a kind of recovery. They will not start from zero, from scratch. They can have something in their hand when they rebuild their home upon return.
Hello! How are you feeling today? Good? Great! Let's rock the boat. I think it's time we talk about climate change. It's here and it's not going away. But we can all do our part, however small we may be. Every little bit counts. You see, it's a fine balance. How can we be productive and yet be mindful of what we consume? How do we live large with smaller impact? How can we move from point to point without straining our environment? How can we use less but gain more? Are there better ways to live sustainably? It's all in the details. Because when you look after the smallest things, the bigger things will take care of themselves. So let's start small. Start at home and reach out. There are so many things we can do on our own or together. Let's give ourselves a chance to care about not just what happens today, but what tomorrow can bring. We may just be a drop in the ocean, but sometimes the smallest ripple leaves an echo that lasts forever. We're part of the change. It's in our hands.
For the past 7 years, rainfall in Bahia, a semi-arid region in the northeast of Brazil, has been erratic, leading to a prolonged drought. Cash crops like beans, maize and cassava have been decimated by this lack of rain. But now farmers here have found hope in an indigenous tree called umbu, which was almost extinct a few years ago. The resurrection of this local crop recently caught the attention of well-known Brazilian chef Fabrício Lemos. He's interested in learning more about cooking with umbu, and he has come to the countryside to meet local farmer Maria Helena Barbosa dos Santos, who will teach him a traditional recipe. But first, she tells him how the drought has impacted farmers here.
When it rained, we planted corn and cassava, and we would harvest it. We had an income. But today, we do not earn anything from these crops anymore, because it does not rain. We do not plant, and we do not harvest.
Unlike corn and cassava, umbu is very well suited to dry conditions. It holds up to 3,000 liters of water in its root system, and it has been consumed locally for generations. But could it provide local farmers with the income they lack? As far back as she can remember, Maria Helena's family has used umbu to make a drink called umbuzada sertaneja. She decides to teach Fabrício this old traditional recipe.
It's a recipe that she learned from her mother, that her grandmother passed on to her mother, and she passed on to her daughter. It makes me happy to see that it is a tradition that is being followed. And if the tradition is being followed, this recipe will not fall into disuse.
It's a simple recipe to make. After washing and removing the stems, the umbu fruit is boiled and the pulp is passed through a sieve to remove the seeds.
Shall we taste it?
Do you want to taste it? Is it sour?
It's sour.
The chefs add sugar and milk and put the umbuzada in the fridge to cool down.
We let it cool down and then it will be ready to serve.
In this heat, it's better cool.
While umbu has always been part of the local diet here, farmers did not see its commercial value, so they cleared the land to plant cash crops. And in 2003, umbu was almost extinct. Now, a state government project supported by the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD, has reintroduced the tree and has helped local farmers see the cultural and commercial value in it. Umbu is a plant that spoils soon after harvest, which is one of the reasons why farmers neglected it. 2 years ago, a new processing plant was built with IFAD's support. The community viewed this with skepticism at first. How could a processing plant be profitable in this barren environment? But the plant now processes up to 500 kilograms of fruit every day, producing organic juice, jams and candies. The products are sold throughout Brazil and are also exported to France and Austria. Maria Helena is part of the local cooperative that runs the plant. Comprised mostly of women and young people, the cooperative has nearly 300 members from 18 communities. Through the project, called Pro Semiárido, the cooperative has received fair trade certifications and runs a nursery which grows various native plants for reintroduction in the area.
The goal of Pro Semiárido is to improve people's living conditions without changing the characteristics of the environment they live in. So preserving water, planting drought-resistant crops, these are the things Pro Semiárido is bringing to strengthen the communities here.
And part of strengthening the communities is the increase in their incomes.
Before, I did not have the opportunity to say, I'm going to buy a computer. Today I have. I did not have the opportunity to renovate my house. Today I have. I can give clothes or shoes to my son and daughter, which I couldn't before.
In the shade of her veranda, also built thanks to the earnings from the umbu, Maria Elena and her family are ready to share a refreshing umbuzada sertaneja with Chef Fabricio.
There are people who are concerned about climate change. Coming here, in the semi-arid region, we see the happiness in Maria Elena, knowing that, although she will not be able to change the weather, she will be able to find alternatives to live in this climate here.
And it is not just Maria Elena who is finding a way to adapt to the changing climate. 70,000 other families in the state of Bahia are benefiting from this project and are able to survive the droughts and earn a living from this local fruit that they once thought was worthless.
Half measures or empty promises. It has used the World Gathering in...
Well, good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zainab Badawi, and it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to the afternoon session of the Climate Action Summit. And so we're going to continue with our pledges from heads of state, more leaders about their commitments to ambitious climate action. And we are going to start with His Excellency Lenin Moreno Garcés, who is President of Ecuador. So please, could you make your way to the floor so that we can begin? Thank you.
¿Listo? Queridos representantes de las naciones.
Representatives of friendly countries, please accept the greeting of the Ecuadorian people, a warm greeting. Since Ecuador ratified the Paris Agreement in 2017, we've worked intensively with a sense of emergency, which is required by climate change as well as the fearsome global warming. We did it for the entire world, for all of our other peoples, for the islands that could disappear forever, and of course, we do it for our children and for our grandchildren. The increase in the temperature of the atmosphere, the melting of the glaciers in the Andes affects the Amazon, and in a few years it will lead to a more aggressive phenomenon of El Niño, which would seriously endanger the wonderful enchanted islands of the Galapagos. The scientists say that the new planetary climate will affect the lives of millions of people along the Pacific coasts, whose agricultural and fishing activities will be severely altered. And that is why we stress once again that the developed countries must make a commitment to share their responsibilities, that the developed countries must make a commitment to share those responsibilities. And Ecuador is a small country, you know that. But it does its share, and it does it seriously, because when it comes to climate change, the only way to preach is by example. With an example, in my country, we are moving firmly towards the reduction of emissions due to deforestation and forest degradation. And our government has reduced the deforestation rate by 24%. What good news. And likewise, Ecuador was the first to use the paths which were mentioned in the Conference of the Parties in Poland in 2018. For the presentation 2020-2025. Its climate commitment places a priority on the National Development Plan. We have called it a whole life. And we also guarantee the rights of nature through the for the current and future generations, because the Constitution of Ecuador recognizes them as having rights to nature, to the Pachamama, as we call it. And this, of course, involves respecting nature, respecting it fully, and restoring it when it has been polluted or when it has been degraded. Obviously, our environmental goals are in line with the Sustainable Development Agenda of the United Nations, which includes an action for climate. And in Ecuador, we are trying to achieve sustainable development to reduce emissions and to increase climate resilience. In order to produce a report on the NDCs, we have tackled this both publicly and privately, reaching agreements with universities, with civil society, and with international cooperation. Dear friends, I was born in the Amazon, and I'm familiar with its great diversity, and so I can't understand how we can make such a mistake when it comes to evolution and development. Evolution, dear friends, evolution must be solidarity. It must be conservation. It must be responsibility, and not to convert it into selfishness and negligence when it comes to the future. Ecuador is one of the 10 most biodiverse countries on the planet. We have urgent problems that we have to resolve. And of course, clearly we are doing so. And that is why, brothers of the world, in this tireless task of fighting against climate change, it's time for all of us, without exception, to make a contribution. We call upon countries to raise their commitments to the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund. And during that process of recapitalization, this week hundreds of millions of people, especially young people, carried out 5,000 events in 160 countries to make us aware of the risks of climate change. In streets, in parks, in squares, they spoke out and they warned us. It is our duty to pay attention to them. It is our duty to listen to the voice of those young people. We've always said that we have to preserve the planet that we leave to our children. And wise men taught us that it is the children who are the ones who are lending us their world. And this world has been lent to us. It's not ours. And we have to return it in equal conditions, hopefully, at least to our children and to our grandchildren. And so the time has come. The time has come to think about what kind of planet we are leaving to our children. And what home are we leaving to our children? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. So we're now going to play you another video, which is from Pope Francis.
Quisiera dar las gracias al secretario general.
I would like to thank the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for convening this meeting and for drawing the attention of heads of state and government and of the entire international community and global public opinion to one of the most serious and disturbing phenomena of our time, and that is climate change. With the Paris Agreement of the 12th of December 2015, the international community became aware of the urgency and the need for a collective response to help build our common home. However, 4 years after that historic agreement, we can see that the commitments that are made by states, these commitments are still very weak and are far from achieving the objectives that were set. Along with so many initiatives, not only by governments, but by civil society as a whole, it is necessary to ask whether there is a real political will to allocate greater human, financial, and technological resources in order to mitigate the negative effects of climate change, and also to help the poorest and most vulnerable populations who suffer the most. With honesty, responsibility, and courage, we have to put our intelligence at the service of another type of progress, one which is healthier, more human, more social, more integral, which is capable of placing economy at the service of human beings, building peace and protecting the environment. Though though the planet is suffering, the window of opportunity is still open. We are still in time. Let's not allow that window to close. Remember those words, honesty, courage, and responsibility. They must play a central role in your work today and your work in the future. And I accompany you with my best wishes and with my blessing. Thank you very much.
Clearly there are greetings in that video from Pope Francis. So our next speaker is His Excellency Leo Varadkar, the Prime Minister of Ireland.
Excellencies, good afternoon. For almost 1,000 years, my country, Ireland, has been associated with the colour green. In the future, I want Ireland to be known as a green country because of how we've responded to the challenges of climate change and environmental destruction. Leadership is required to take action, and I believe leadership is also required to convince our people that it's not too late to act. Here we've all been inspired by children and young people who've embraced this cause and put it at the top of our agenda. And at home, we've listened to the views of our people through the Citizens' Assembly and developed a consensus through an all-party parliamentary committee. And now with our climate action plan, we know what we're going to do, and will underpin that through climate action legislation, including carbon budgeting next year. We've already banned fracking. We have a climate action fund paid for by a levy on the oil industry. Our sovereign wealth fund has divested from fossil fuel. We will outlaw the use of single-use plastics, and our public sector is already doing so. We have a carbon tax and have a cross-party agreement to increase it to €80 per tonne by 2030. And from next year, all new revenue raised from the carbon tax will be ring-fenced to fund new climate action and just transition. Just transition to protect those most exposed to higher fuel and energy costs and for whom new jobs must be found. Climate action to fund the transformation of our transport, electricity, building and food production systems. We'll take coal off our grid by 2025, and our renewable electricity will rise from 30% today to 70% in 10 years' time. By 2030, we'll have prohibited the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles, and by then we'll have substantially electrified our fleet. Indeed, all new public buses being bought from now on are hybrids. We'll plant as many as 440 million trees, and we'll work with other countries to reform the EU's common agricultural policy to shift payments towards farmers who farm in more sustainable and environmentally sensitive ways. Last week, on foot of a request from me, our Independent Climate Change Advisory Council recommended that exploration for oil should end, as it's incompatible with a low-carbon future. They recommended that exploration for natural gas should continue for now, as a transition fuel which we will need for decades to come, as alternatives are developed and fully deployed. I accept this advice, and Ireland will now act on it. In practice and initially, it means a moratorium on exploration in 80% of our waters. At UN level, we're leading the preparatory coalition on youth and public engagement with the Marshall Islands, Nigeria and Namibia. And I urge all of you here to join us in signing our pledge, Kwan Gesh. Our international development policy prioritises those countries that are most vulnerable to climate change, a crisis not of their making, particularly the least developed countries in the world and the small island developing states. Delegates, I believe we have a chance here, a chance to replace a climate of fear and anxiety with a new climate of action and opportunity that's in our hands, responding to the challenge of the century with creativity, imagination, courage, and above all, determination. Thank you very much.
That's better. Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, for sharing your plans with us. So our next speaker, whom I'd like to invite to the stage, is His Excellency Edel Geriev Ruslan, who is advisor to the President of Russia. So, thank you. Пожалуйста. Спасибо.
Уважаемый господин
Distinguished Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, Russia supports the motto of the UN Climate Summit. It's time to move from words to concrete action. A good friend of Russia, President of France, has already carried out half of our mission, so I only have the remaining half to deliver. And today I have the honor to announce that in accordance with a decree of the government of the Russian Federation dated 21st September 2019, the Russian Federation has accepted the Paris Agreement and is becoming a full-fledged participant of this international legal instrument. So what comes next? Ambitious global efforts of tomorrow must have a solid, sustainable basis today in the present. The Russian Federation is already playing a leading role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions compared to the 1990 baseline. Our total emissions over this period have decreased almost by half. This represents 41 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, which on the planetary scale has allowed to cumulatively halt global warming for an entire year. Moreover, it should also be mentioned that Russia is making another colossal contribution to combating CO2 emissions and to CO2 sequestration, which is not reflected in the contributions, but is a crucial factor in this effort. These are Russia's boreal forests, which are the lungs of the planet. We intend to take an ambitious approach to reviewing our nationally determined contribution. Our country is also currently developing a state-of-the-art system for government regulation of greenhouse gas emissions, one that takes into account the best national and international practices, as well as the views of the academic and business communities. Russian academics and scientists are continuing to make a tangible contribution to this effort, and Russian low-carbon technologies are successfully being implemented around the world. Meanwhile, in Russia itself, a major energy power, the energy mix today already meets low carbon requirements. Natural gas represents more than half of primary energy resources, and it has an undoubted advantage over other types of fuels in terms of emissions. More than 1/3 of the energy produced is completely zero carbon in terms of its source. This is nuclear and hydropower stations, as well as renewable energies. Distinguished Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, climate change is our common challenge, one where there is no place for attempts to politicize, to introduce conflict issues to the climate agenda, or to divide up states into blocs. Thank you very much for your attention.
Where do I go next? Introduce the panel. Thank you very much indeed. That was the advisor to the President of the Russian Federation. Thank you for sharing his thoughts with us. So we opened there with some pledges. We're now going to move to a different part of our session today, which is we're going to have a collection of people, some panel members, and we're going to talk about cities, because as you probably know, 1 in 2 people globally live in cities, and cities, of course, are the engines of economies, national economies, as well as the global economy, and are responsible for 3/4 of global emissions. So the rapid transition to carbon neutral and resilient cities all around the world is critical to tackling climate change, securing economic prosperity, creating jobs, reducing pollution, and improving the quality of life for billions, including the most vulnerable populations. So in this regard, national governments, sub-national leaders, and the private sector all have a critical role to play together. So I'd like to invite to the stage now His Excellency Recep Tayyip Erdogan, President of Turkey, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, President of Kenya, Ms. Janet Mills, Governor of the US state of Maine, and Mr. Werner Hoyer, President of the European Investment Bank. And we also have, is the Mayor of Surabaya here? We'll get her audio. Okay, we'll get her. Thank you very much. Mr. Werner Hoyer, thank you. President of the European Investment Bank. And we also have Ms. Tri Risma Harini, who is Mayor of Surabaya in Indonesia. Welcome to you. President Erdogan, the battle against climate change will be won or lost in cities. What are governments doing to unlock, support? You need a speech course. Oh, you want to speak at the lectern? Okay. Right. Mr. Erdogan is going to make his way to the lectern.
Sayın Devlet,
Heads of states and governments, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to greet you all with my most heartfelt emotions. Everything that was offered for the benefit of the human race on the face of the earth is something that was entrusted in our hands. And it's a legacy that we have to hand over to the future generations. And until we do that, we are obliged to protect it in the best fashion possible. In terms of its results and consequences, global climate change is a global problem that knows no bounds. And in the solution of global problems, we need the highest level of national and international and regional cooperation. Mr. Secretary General ever so cordially invited all of the member states to fight climate change in a committed fashion. And upon this invitation, along with Kenya and United Nations Habitat, Turkey started assuming the co-chairmanship of the Infrastructure, Cities and Local Action Study Group. This study group is involved in a very critical area where the ramifications will be felt all around the world in our fight against global climate change. In order for us to be successful against climate change, we need to start up acting on a local and a regional level. And as Turkey, we are very well aware of that. In one of the most crowded metropoli of the world, I have been the mayor for more than 4.5 years in Istanbul. And for the last 17 years, I have been serving my country as the prime minister and then the president. And along with Istanbul, in around all of our 81 provinces, we've managed to almost completely transition to the natural gas consumption for household needs. And in terms of renewable energy, Turkey is a leading country in our region. We are generating 30% of our electricity out of renewable resources. Up until 2023, we are hoping to rise up to 39% in terms of the share of renewable energy in electricity generation in Turkey. While we are establishing and building up climate-sensitive and energy-efficient cities, we're trying to eliminate the disaster risks. We have a project called the Gardens of the Nation, through which we will be able to increase our green areas, parks, and our capacity for Utah forests. We are some of the rare countries around the world managing successfully to increase the forestry wealth in our country. And for the last 17 years, we have been planting more than 4 billion trees all around Turkey. And we are still planting an additional of 11 million trees all around Turkey, especially on November the 11th. We are building new transportation lines in our cities in order to use more green energy resources. The share of the railways will be increased up to 10% from 5%, and in its share in public transportation, it's going to go up to 4% from 1%. And the fast train tracks will be increased up to 5,600 kilometers in the next 5 years, and the length of the inner city railways will be increased by 50%. We have already realized historical projects such as Marmara Rail and the Eurasian Tunnel. Around Turkey, we have focused entirely on waste management, developing climate-friendly technologies, and the improvement of the water, air, and soil quality. And we are meticulously invested in diversifying the energy resources that we use for all forms of industrial needs. And we've managed to decrease the use of plastic bags by 4/3 as a result of recent initiatives. And the Zero Waste Project, which was launched under the auspices of my spouse, has been cherished in all of our cities and all around Turkey in all of the organizations and the institutions. The Zero Waste Project will be widespread in Turkey in no time, and by 2023, in more than 400,000 buildings, we will have completely transitioned to zero waste system. And the recycling rate from wastes will be increased up to 35% from 13%. We have been heavily investing in creating special routes for bicycles in cities, and those special routes will be increased up to 4,000 kilometers from the current 1,000 kilometers by 2023. Without giving up on our sustainable developmental goals, we are still focusing on creating cities that are resilient against disasters and in full compliance with the challenges introduced by climate change. And in order to fight climate change locally, we are preparing exclusive plans for every region in Turkey, one of which was already drafted for the Black Sea region, and the other projects will be launched for the other regions very soon. We have an initiative called Leadership Initiative for Local Climate Investment. The second initiative of our study group is Zero Carbon Emissions Building for Everyone. These two initiatives have two very significant components. The first one is until 2030, in all of the new edifices and in all of the new structures, and up until 2050, all of the existing buildings will be converted to zero carbon emission structures, and the maps therein will be drafted very soon. And secondly, until 2030, a total investments of $1 trillion will be revived for global climate change. And our third initiative is about the creation of climate-friendly transportation networks. We hope and pray that these initiatives will be very beneficial, and we invite all of the countries to help us with our endeavors as much as their capacities and capabilities allow. The study group, the co-chairmanship of which is conducted by Turkey, will hopefully be very beneficial for all the stakeholders involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, President Erdogan. President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, we know that Africa is the fastest urbanizing continent in the world with an urban population that's expected to double over the next 20 years. And this comes with a distinct set of challenges. And one of them is that this is happening at a time of unprecedented climate stress and impact. So what can governments do to ensure that African cities and regions transition to the new green economy that is equitable and sustainable for all? And you may be more comfortable staying seated, actually. No, that's fine. Yes, the microphone is just here.
I think everybody wants us to go up there.
Okay, that's fine. Whatever makes you happy, that's fine.
Thank you, Zainab. And I take this opportunity first and foremost to thank the Secretary General for convening this Climate Action Summit and the call for even greater ambition by all of us in tackling this challenge that calls indeed for global action. Our commitment is to tackle climate change, and this runs deep and arises out of our need to secure our future and that of our children, as we all have been victims of drought and declining rainfall, which have destroyed our livelihoods, and many lives have been lost. And all this calls on a need for increasing the requirement of public resources to address emergencies and disasters. Kenya, therefore, has joined together with other nations in affirmation of the global commitments by ratifying our agreements and further domesticating the same in our national laws and strategies to ensure that there is action at all levels of government. In energy, we have transformed our energy sources to renewables to the tune of 90%. And I recently inaugurated our largest wind farm in the continent at Lake Turkana, and we continue to prioritize our energy developments from geothermal and other natural resources. These new sources enable us to have enabled us to expand connectivity from less than 30% in 2013 to 75% in 6 years, and our aim is to achieve universal access by 2022. On adaptation, we aim to plant 2 billion trees to achieve the global threshold of 10% tree cover by 2022 instead of our intended target of 2030. This is in addition to the global commitment to restore 5.1 million hectares as our national contribution to the African Forest and Landscapes Restoration Initiative. Indeed, in November of 2018, Kenya co-hosted with Japan and Canada the first ever Global Sustainable Blue Economy Conference, which led to renewed commitments for marine protection, plastics and waste management, maritime safety and security, and ocean-based livelihoods development. Kenya is also a member of the high-level panel on sustainable ocean economy and will be co-hosting with Portugal the UN Oceans Conference in 2020, where we hope to launch a new compact for sustainable ocean economy development. Sustainable climate action is about people and their livelihoods. We must therefore ensure that we leave no one behind. We have therefore chosen mitigating and adaptation measures that are consistent with and enable our people to secure their livelihoods and expand economic opportunities. We have partnered with the private sector, for example, in expanding access to alternative cooking and lighting fuel, targeted at the urban as well as rural poor, and we intend to transition 80% of households using biomass energy to 100% clean cooking fuel. As part of our commitment to climate action, Kenya has also joined with Turkey in co-leading the Infrastructure, Cities and Local Action track, which resulted in various ambitious initiatives. One of them is building climate resilience for the urban poor. Developed in partnership with Brazil and UN Habitat, and this aims to build climate resilience to 600 million vulnerable people by 2030. Kenya will champion the implementation of this initiative and mobilization of the necessary resources to meet this challenge. Indeed, we should remember that climate action will only succeed when initiatives similar to the ones I have highlighted target to improve the lives of everyone, including the 1 billion urban poor that face climate effects today. Kenya is committed to leaving no one behind by ensuring that our vulnerable people have access to energy in terms of amount and price, access to energy that is bringing change, providing new opportunities, improved security, clean cooking, and education, not only in our urban areas, but even in small rural villages. Indeed, as I conclude, let us all heed the call of the Secretary General for us to express more ambition in tackling this existential challenge of climate change. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, President Kenyatta. Thank you for giving us your perspective. Governor Mills, so we know that political leadership is absolutely critical when it comes to climate change. So can you tell us what Maine is doing to respond to the climate emergency and perhaps how this can be replicated? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Distinguished delegates and guests, members of the General Assembly, Maine won't wait. Our small state of 1.3 million people, which juts out of the northeast corner of this country, bordering Canada, bending towards Europe, is 90% forested, with clean water, rolling hills, fertile farmlands, mighty rivers, and deep ports, about 3,000 miles of rocky, jagged, bold coast. But our whole state is experiencing climate change. Our weather, our iconic lobster industry, our insect populations, the warming, rising, fish-rich seas that bathe our shores. Maine won't wait. So we have just enacted the most significant renewable standards in the country. We are investing in clean energy and conservation, electric vehicles and energy efficiency, community resiliency, sequestering carbon in our soil and forests with sustainable forest practices. We are cutting our appetite for fossil fuels on which we have come to depend so much for heat, electricity, and transportation. And we have invented the most innovative floating offshore wind platforms in the world. These investments will not impair our economy. They will, in fact, improve it, bolster it. And we are doing these things now because we believe the irrefutable science. Maine won't wait. Will you? We all have what it takes to combat climate change, to protect the irreplaceable earth we all share and care for. What is more precious than water, air, soil, the health and happiness of our children and our children's children and yours? For all of them, today, by executive order, I have the state of Maine will be carbon neutral by 2045. And if our small state can do it, you can as well. Because we've got to unite to preserve our precious common ground for our common planet in uncommon ways for this imperative common purpose. Maine won't wait. Will you? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Governor Maine. So Mayor Risma Harini of
from UN have one of the most critical sectors in our economies. Transportation is central of the well-being of our people in our fight against climate change. But transport is also responsible for around 28% of energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. We welcome the launch of the Action Towards Climate-Friendly Transport, or ACT initiative that assists government with policies. It funds the transformation to electric bus system, support changes in freight vehicles and fosters dialogue with the key actors. Being together diverse governments at all levels, private sector organization, civil society, from motorbikes to bus. In addition, pedestrian widths are improved and bike lanes are made available because our 2 hectares of green lines concept both in household and city level. Through waste to energy technology, we can also generate electricity in our disposal site. And we have started to use solar cell as well as hybrid windmill for alternative energy. We implement a government system where all public services is delivered online. This helps to avoid the need for people to travel a lot because they can access services that they need from wherever they are. Now we can enjoy a better air quality, reduce flooded area from 52% to 2%, decreasing of temperatures up to degrees Celsius, and decreasing rate of disease. In Surabaya, we are working our talk. All citizens, students, government, private sectors, media, army, and police officers are working together to build and safeguarding the city. It is similar to the ACT initiative, which uses multi-stakeholders approach. Through ACT initiative, we aim to build a better future for sustainable zero-emission transport. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. So, Werner Hoyer from the European Investment Bank. We know that finance is key to accelerating the rollout of sustainable urban infrastructure projects. So tell us more about the initiative called Leadership for Urban Climate Investment, also known as LUCI, and how it addresses the various gaps in local finance to foster and support the transition to carbon neutral and resilient cities, especially in developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you on this important topic. 4 years ago, most of us were here and we celebrated the achievement of an agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals, and a few months later we convened in Paris and celebrated the success of COP21. Well, I think we can say we embarked the right track, but 4 years later we can say we are far behind schedule. This year's developments were a wake-up call for the international community and for most members of this United Nations organization. On behalf of a broad coalition of partners, including the governments of Germany, Cameroon, France, Luxembourg, Mexico, and the United Kingdom, as well as development, finance, and climate finance institutions and city networks, I have the great honor to announce a new transformative initiative to help cities invest in low-carbon and climate-resilient infrastructure. LUCI, the Leadership for Urban Climate Investment, is launched today, bringing together existing and future initiatives under the leadership of Germany's Environment Ministry, BMU. LUCI will accelerate urban climate finance and reinforce national framework conditions for urban investments. It will strengthen the capacity of 2,000 cities over the next 6 years in project preparation, and it will link 1,000 new projects to finance. One way it will do this is through the Cities Climate Finance Gap Fund. Luxembourg and Germany are leading the way here with respective grant contributions of up to 10 and 40 million euros each to the fund. Ladies and gentlemen, the EIB group is stepping up its climate ambitions. We are already the by far biggest IFI when it comes to climate change financing. But we aim to unlock more than $1.1 trillion of climate action and environmental investment over the next decade through EIB financing, a significant share of this will be in cities. To achieve this, the EU Bank Group will provide for climate action and environmental sustainability by 2025, 50% of all our activities. In addition, by the end of 2020, we will align all our financing activities with goals of the Paris Agreement. There is climate in everything we do. As an important first step, we will phase out energy projects that depend on fossil fuels. And we will position EIB as an incubator for climate finance and expertise to mobilize others, helping our societies and economies transform to a low-carbon future. We expect Lucy to be an indispensable tool on this journey. Maybe you would like to join. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Werner Hoyer, and that concludes this session. Thank you very much indeed to all our presenters. Thank you. And Mr. President, thank you, Governor, Mayor, and Werner Hoyer. Thank you so much indeed for your contributions. We will now be returning to the individual speakers who are making their pledges known to us. So please welcome to the stage Mr. Charles Michel, who is Prime Minister of Belgium. Thank you.
Monsieur le Secrétaire Général.
Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen. It is an outcry of the heart addressed to our consciences by future generations. Climate change is this century's main challenge, and we have no choice. We need to step up our action. Combating climate change must guide our actions. It must mobilize our wills and commitments, both through the initiatives that we undertake on the national level in our country, as well as the approach that we need to develop on the international level. And I do believe that not only can we succeed, but we must succeed, and we will succeed. Every time that humanity has faced major obstacles, it has been the resource of innovation, intelligence, and determination that was the key to overcoming those obstacles. My country, Belgium, stands ready to review its nationally determined contributions through 2020, taking into account the fact that we must be ambitious and must act urgently. On the European level, we have also developed an ambitious goal to develop a long-term strategy to achieve climate neutrality in accordance with the Paris Agreement by 2050. Likewise, on the European level, the multi-year financial framework 2021-2027, which is currently being discussed, currently provides for 25% of the total European budget to be allocated to combating climate change. That amounts to $320 billion. On the international level, and in the context of our relations with the least developed countries, my country will likewise continue to fund climate change, combating climate change. In the recent period, we have contributed millions of euros to climate-related activities. This year, 15 million will likewise be allocated towards the least developed countries, which makes Belgium the fourth largest contributor to the fund for those countries. And finally, with regards to the Green Climate Fund, I have a personal determination to become one of the leaders in Europe in this respect. We will continue increasing our contributions, and we support Chile's initiative to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Going forward, I would also propose to the Parliament to double our global climate change contributions. In terms of biodiversity and oceans specifically, we will continue efforts in order to be at the forefront of ensuring that we're able to combat emissions caused by maritime transport as well. We want to participate in the leadership of strengthening synergies in this area, and we will continue developing marine protected areas. And we hope to further develop our policies and ensure that 30% of our marine areas are protected by 2030. And finally, climate and security. This must be an integral part of international mobilization. In the coming months, we will also use our position as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council to this end to also integrate more climate risk management aspects in Security Council resolutions. The challenge is a major one, but it is within our reach if we are determined and if we mobilize. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed, Prime Minister Charles Michel. And our next speaker is Idriss Déby Itno, His Excellency, President of Chad.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to warmly congratulate Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for having taken the initiative to host this important conference devoted to an issue as vital as climate change. And of course, I would like to include all of the global actors, starting with the government, civil society, and including the leaders of the financial and business world. This extremely important meeting is a crucial step in order to promote a new impetus in our collective commitment to accelerate the implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate change and that of Agenda 2030. This summit also offers us an opportunity to take stock of actions and efforts that are being made in order to reduce their emissions by more than 45% by 2030, with a view to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. In this respect, certain aspects must command our attention. The sector that causes the most emissions, where climate resilience will have the greatest impact. Africa in general, and Chad in particular, barely contribute very little to emissions. But I have to stress that we are interested, therefore, in climate resilience. Indeed, the main consequences of climate change in my country are, among other things, the reduction of precipitation, the variability of precipitation, drought, the decline in agricultural production, the shrinking of waterways such as Lake Chad, flooding, heat waves, violent winds, disturbing desertification, famine, and rural exodus, which make things easy for the terrorist threat. In order to contain the perverse effects of all of these factors, Chad has adopted a realistic and specific plan designed to enhance our national ambitions when it comes to adaptation, mitigation, as well as the implementation of the nationally determined contributions. When it comes to adaptation, we are attempting to promote an intensive agriculture and also to develop renewable energy in the rural world and to strengthen weather networks. When it comes to mitigation, Chad is committed to producing 200 gigawatts an hour per year of solar energy and 50 gigawatts an hour per year of wind energy. Likewise, we are also considering building a national line of 225 kilovolts in order to connect all of our towns. In this respect, a special effort is being made and is necessary on the part of developed countries in order to facilitate access to renewable energies and making them less expensive than fossil fuels. And remaining within the area of adaptation, Chad has also set up programs and has undertaken actions to protect the environment and to sustainably manage our natural resources as well as environmental risks. Among these initiatives, I could mention, for example, the establishment of a national adaptation plan to adapt to climate change, which would tackle the urgent and immediate needs of Chad. The establishment of a greenhouse gas emission tax on motorized transportation. The establishment of an agency to promote renewable energy. And support for agriculture, which produces very little carbon emission and a resilient agriculture through our National Development Program for 2017-2021. And so Chad will also achieve its ambition through its contribution to the NDCs by 2020. The realization of this ambition requires the mobilization of several billions of dollars to finance mitigation initiatives as well as adaptation to climate change. From this standpoint, the implementation of commitments taken by all parties within the framework of the Paris Climate Agreement and the Addis Ababa Action Plan of Agenda 2030, these commitments are now urgent. We should recall as well that developed countries who are parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change are also committed to mobilizing more than $100 billion a year by 2020. And this in order to meet the needs of developing countries. And in this respect, the full operationalization of the Green Fund as swiftly as possible should be a common and immediate priority. We cannot go back to the mistakes of the past. Announcements are good, but achieving them is something different. The very serious consequences of climate change are today real, and no one is immune to it around the world. Hence, let's go from speeches to concrete action as swiftly as possible. The survival of our species is at stake, and especially that of future generations that are waiting for strong signals from us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, President Idriss Déby. Thank you so much for sharing your plans with us. I would now like to invite to the stage so he can share his plan on climate action with us, His Excellency Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the Prime Minister of Greece. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeynep. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the early afternoon of July 23rd of last year, a small wildfire started on a hill outside Athens. Fire services deal with thousands of these every year. This one, however, was different. Driven by ferocious winds, it quickly spread and reached the suburban town of Mati. Once it entered the pine-cladded residential area, it became uncontainable. People ran for their lives. 102 of them did not make it. They perished in a blazing inferno. It was all over in less than 4 hours. The Mati disaster shook Greek society to its core. Extreme weather events are the direct consequences of climate change. It is not a problem that can be put off for more decades. It must be addressed here and now, and its implications affect the lives of those who, until recently, did not care much about the issue. My country is a kaleidoscope of natural beauty and unique cultural heritage. Respect for the natural world was a key tenet of many Greek philosophers who understood the implications of disrupting the delicate balance between man and nature. Yet, ancient Greeks had no access to scientific facts. They only made hypotheses. We do not have that excuse, yet we have failed to act. Almost half of the atmosphere's extra human-produced carbon dioxide was put there after the beginning of the 90s, when climate science was robust enough to warn us about the implications of uncontrolled greenhouse gas emissions. Greece's future is tied to its ability to protect its unique natural environment. Rising sea levels threaten our coasts and islands, thus our tourism industry. Extreme weather events, such as storms, floods, and heat waves, have a devastating impact on Greek society and on our economy. Our new government has made, addressing the implications of climate change a core component of our government policies. We are fully committed to the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and we strongly support the strategic long-term vision for a climate-neutral European Union by 2050. For us, it is not just an obligation, but also a great economic opportunity. The Greek government plans to adapt a new, ambitious national strategy for energy and climate before the end of the year. Let me just highlight two important components of it. Our goal is to close all lignite power plants the latest by 2028, despite the fact that we remain a big producer of lignite, brown coal. And we plan to ban single-use plastics across the country by the end of 2021. However, climate change does not only affect our present and future. It also affects our past, our history. Extreme weather events and the long-term impact of adverse climate conditions have this potential to significantly damage cultural and natural heritage sites, but also to disrupt century-old ways of life. When olive trees are destroyed by bacteria and olive fly, it is not just an economic catastrophe. It affects the lives of local communities to such an extent that it poses a threat to our unique, intangible cultural heritage. Greece is deeply concerned about the potential impact of climate change on our cultural assets. We convened last June in Athens an international conference entitled Impacts of Climate Change on Cultural Heritage, Facing Disasters, Changes to our cultural monuments are often subtle, gradual, and go under who have supported this initiative, and encourage those who have not done so yet to endorse its commitments. My country intends to convene a high-level meeting next year in Athens with the aim of adopting a declaration for the protection of cultural and natural heritage from climate change impacts. To shadow the 25 centuries will continue to be a beacon.
Mr. President, thank you.
The United Nations Secretary General, as well as an entire team of rural people, and has an impact on the availability of water resources across the entire country. And this happens regularly and undermines the resilience of our people and systems and infrastructure. Our strategy plans on accelerating a transition towards renewable energy and to made strong commitments for mitigation and adaptation. Indeed, in terms of mitigation, the government committed to reduce CO2 emissions by 40% by 2030 when compared with the reference baseline. This scenario, this 40% is unconditional, and the reduction linked thereto will be achieved thanks to the implementation of energy programs and projects and transport projects that have already been launched. As part of the potential scenario, which presupposes supplementary financing from the international community, we have committed to reduce this by a further 20% when compared with the scenario that is certain. President, ladies and gentlemen, Djibouti is already respecting its commitments, and we've implemented several projects which have allowed us to reduce CO2 emissions and also to strengthen our country's resilience. More than 80% of the projects that have been identified have been implemented. And this was in the best case scenario. They're currently being implemented, and major positive impacts have been felt within the country in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but also in terms of the improvement of a standard of living of our people. This is unequivocal. Also, in terms of energy transition, our project to collect electricity with Ethiopia has allowed us to reduce by more than 150 kilotons our CO2 emissions in Djibouti. Moreover, Djibouti has also launched several renewable energy projects. Geothermal energy, for one, wind turbines, and solar energy. All of this will allow us to substantially reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm delighted to announce to this august assembly that Djibouti plans to achieve an energy mix that is 100% renewable energy by 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, Djibouti's ambition for an energy transition cannot be funded by domestic funds alone, because Djibouti is one of the least developed countries. And this is a funding is focused on main sectors such as education and healthcare. The development of renewable energy, and particularly that of geothermal energy that my country does have, and we have an excellent potential for geothermal energy, this requires significant funds to be made available for the exploration phase and also the adaptation resilience phase. This has also suffered from insufficient international funding. The implementation of the Paris Agreement, as well as that of the numerous international decisions taken before, require international funding, and a substantial amount of that. Thus, we note with regret that the financial commitments made in Paris have not yet been honoured. Thus, the Green Climate Fund has less than $10 billion in it over the last 4 years. Here, I would take this opportunity to thank and congratulate those countries who have pledged to substantially increase their contributions to this fund, and would urge industrialized nations to ensure that their pledges can be honoured and to simplify the procedures for accessing these funds. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you to the President of Djibouti. Thank you. So, please can I have our next participants on the stage. This session is going to present commitments by governments and their partners to include enhanced energy efficiency and efficient climate-friendly cooling in updated national climate plans to make them more ambitious. So each initiative is a rich partnership that brings together national and subnational governments, private sector, civil society, finance, international organisations. So please may I invite to the stage His Excellency Danny Four, President of the Seychelles, Mr. Frank Jensen, Lord Mayor of the City of Copenhagen, Ms. Kate Hampton, CEO of the Children Investment Foundation, and Mr. Eric Rondelat, CEO and Chairman of the company Signify. Thank you. So,
of our revised NDC, areas including switching to LED street lights across the islands and providing solar PVs and energy-efficient appliances to all public schools. We also have financial incentives to encourage private homes and small businesses to switch to low-energy and energy-efficient home appliances, lighting imported into the country. The government also exempted all certified energy-efficient appliances from the value-added tax. Our green transport, Seychelles will draw up a national e-mobility strategy and regulatory and policy frameworks for electric vehicles, including business models and fiscal schemes. Use air conditioners and refrigeration more, which increases our emissions and carbon footprint if the equipment is not energy efficient and we use fossil fuels. Apart from the mandatory energy efficiency standards for cooling equipment, Seychelles is also shifting to low-carbon and ozone-friendly technology as part of the Green Cooling Africa initiative to substantially reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to refrigeration and air conditioning. Mr. Secretary General, the seeds are stepping.
3 minutes. How can cities prepare for climate change? Why is cooling and efficiency important for city dwellers and the C40 network of cities? There's an important conference on cities in Copenhagen next month, and I just wonder if you could tell us how you intend to take this issue forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored and proud to represent the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group today. Cities are central to achieve the Paris Agreement goals, accounting for almost 80% of energy consumption. Prices. Solutions like green corridors will support efforts to pedestrianize and green buildings to reduce the need for active cooling. For its part, my city, Copenhagen, has developed district cooling based on seawater. It used 70% less energy compared to regular air conditioning. Finally, public-private partnerships and knowledge sharing between local, national and global level are key to solving the climate crisis. Therefore, C40 and the city of Copenhagen have joined the Cool Coalition. That's why I'm honored to host the C40 World Mayors Summit in Copenhagen next month. Mayors from around the world will convene alongside other leaders to accelerate actions and support national action plans presented here today in New York. It is very simple, ladies and gentlemen. We need to act. Not just some of us, all of us. We need to act together, and we need to do it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Lord Mayor, for telling us about your cool coalition, as you put it, in your allotted time. Kate Hampton, you're the CEO of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. Why is energy efficiency a topic that your foundation prioritises? Again, within your time, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At Children's Investment Fund Foundation, we focus on improving the lives of children around the world, so it's obvious that we would prioritize climate change as one of the challenges we work on. As part of our work combating climate change, over the last decade, we've been committed to phasing down super-polluting F-gases that are used in refrigeration and air conditioning. And we worked hard with many people in this room to secure the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. As mentioned by the President of the Seychelles and Mayor Jensen of Copenhagen, cooling is one of the top drivers of electricity demand. We need to provide equitable access to cooling to protect people from extreme heat, keep food fresh, vaccines stable, and much, much more. But the more we cool, the more we heat the planet. In a warming world, cooling will be increasingly important for people's health, nutrition, and productivity, and indeed for the achievement of many of the Sustainable Development Goals. The growing demand for cooling will, if current approaches continue, contribute significantly to further global warming. So I'm pleased to be able to share with you that SIF is granting an additional 20 million to the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme alongside other foundations to support faster action on efficient climate-friendly cooling. I'm also very excited to welcome the Cool Coalition, this global partnership of governments, businesses, and civil society. And I also urge heads of state to sign the Biarritz Pledge for Fast Action on Efficient Cooling, initiated at the French G7 meeting this August. In response to your call to action, Mr. Secretary General, over the next 18 months, the Cooling Coalition will take forward the biggest surge of coordinated activity to make efficient climate-friendly cooling accessible to all of those who need it as soon as possible. Our work will support new cooling policies, national cooling plans, the mobilization of finance, design and testing of new cooling products, services, research, capacity building, and further ratifications of the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. This combined strategy to improve energy efficiency and of cooling equipment while phasing down HFCs under the Kigali Amendment is potentially one of the biggest mitigation opportunities today. That being said, I'm ambivalent about being on this stage today. I'm both deeply honored and incredibly sad. This morning we heard from children and young people about how we are falling desperately short. I wish that my seat had been taken by a G20 leader doubling down on his or her Paris commitment, rising to the challenge set out by the Secretary General, united behind the science and united with our young people. If we can't massively accelerate the many solutions available to us now, solutions that improve health and productivity, tackle poverty and climate change together at the same time, then what are we doing, really? Let's embrace a better future, because it will be better, and let's embrace it now, together.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Hampton. Thank you. Now, Eric Rondeler, as CEO of Signify, you represent the 3% Club, which you just mentioned a short time ago when I introduced the President of Seychelles. So what is this club all about? And how will it help countries to enhance their climate ambition to deliver on the energy transition?
Thank you. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, let me first come back on the reality gap, which is the gap between the commitment that we have made all collectively to be able to keep the rise of the temperature of the planet Earth below 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century and the needed actions to achieve this. More than ever, we need to act faster and more decisively if we want to close that gap. We think that at this day and age, inactivity is the biggest threat to our species. Now, we are calling on governments, more governments, to make definite commitments and put in place stronger actions to become carbon neutral by 2050. And we call on companies to do the same thing, but even faster, by the end of 2030. So the next question is it doable? Is it possible? We believe it is still possible by implementing very simple and concrete measures. And there's one of them that I want to describe here. We need to more than double our progress in energy efficiency, which is sitting at this point in time between 1.3 to 1.5% on an annual basis. We need to move it to 3%. And in doing so, if we are improving by 3%, the efficiency of our building combined with more use of renewable energies, we would be able to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So as you have said it, I'm here representing 15 countries and 10 companies that stand behind the banner of what we call the 3% Club. And these countries and these companies have made definite commitments, and they are acting at this point in time to achieve just this, using existing cost-effective. The company that I represent here also signifies
as Korea serves as the contributions will serve as an opportunity for GIST Summit next year. The international the WHO in order to improve air quality, cross-border international cooperation Guterres for his efforts and leadership in hosting the Climate Action Summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. Now I would like to welcome to the stage
enhance the Kingdom's Climate Action Plan.
A été créé en 2016 et notre pacte national lancé en
the eradication recovery from waste. Is also in with electricities for climate action to make progress in implementing economic and financial policy that is committed to a global transition towards a low-carbon economy. In addition, the Principality is resolutely committed alongside developing countries, particularly small island states, who are amongst on the front line of climate change. To this end, Monaco will participate to the replenishment of the Green Fund for the Climate. Particularly aware as we are of the link between climate and the ocean, I've also wanted that Monaco to commit within the Coalition for Nature-Based Solutions. Science must be at the foundation of all of our decisions.
Sheikh Hasina, we'll start with you. For people experiencing the impact of has done in this regard, because of course you are a striking example of the power of effective adaptation, and so tell us what can be done to prepare for and prevent disasters. I think you're comfortable here. Thank you, Sheikh Hasina. Yes, and this session, of course, is everybody has 3 minutes, so I'd be grateful if you could stay within your time constraints. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Ms. Moderator. The impacts of climate change have been devastating on the life and livelihood of almost all 2 billion people every year. Be it floods in Bangladesh and India. Only 147 square lands. But Bangladesh is not amateur. But Bangladesh is going to be sufferer. Frequency of extreme climate events is increasing. But in Bangladesh, casualties are reduced to almost zero from hundreds of thousands few years back due to efficient early warning system managements. In the coastal area, disasters. We evacuate people, and 1 billion people around them, and a coordinated approach.
Mitigation and adaptation.
The indigenous people leading holistic plans and in previous and informed consent, access to the development of renewable energies in keeping with our self-determination. Based on these actions, we propose protecting the biocultural diversity, to carbon and reducing carbon emissions, protecting the means of traditional livelihood of the indigenous people, food sovereignty, water sovereignty, and cultural transmission, supporting indigenous peoples to be resilient, producing climate solutions which are effective using system and knowledges from the indigenous people's know-how, as well as scientific knowledge. But that's not enough. We need to effectively implement the Declaration of the United Nations with full participation and contribution of indigenous peoples in other climate actions and strengthening specific national contributions. Independent support for our meetings, world meetings, regional meetings, and national meetings. Access to information which is relevant and broken down. And most especially, a strong commitment to maintain global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Actions, territories, rivers, and oceans of the indigenous peoples will all benefit each of your nations. There's no time left. We must make a pact for life and for our future. Thank you.
Katan, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Katan. So, Bill Gates, you're here today to make some significant announcements to support people who are extremely vulnerable to climate change, including smallholder farmers. So, please let us know what these are. Thank you.
I'm honored to be here today representing the Global Commission on Adaptation, which the other co-chairs are the ex-Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, and the about-to-be Director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva. Adaptation has not received as much attention as mitigation, and yet it is equally important. I also want to thank the many governments who have co-convened the Commission's effort and are seeking to advance the recommendations. We were formed to galvanize global action to make sure the world's most vulnerable populations are allowed to adapt as much as possible to the climate change they'll face. I've really appreciated Ban Ki-moon's vision and commitment to this mission. Thanks to his leadership, he can claim a legacy that includes two very important frameworks that will shape the future of the planet: the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. Climate change will impact every one of the 7 billion people on the planet. But the hardest hit will be the world's most vulnerable people, like the 500 million farming families in places like sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Ironically, these are the people who did the least to cause climate change. Climate change will reduce their harvests and strain the global food system at the same time that global food demand will increase by over 60% mid-century. The world can still prevent the absolute worst effects of climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and developing new technologies and sources of energy. But the effect of rising temperatures are already underway. And even in the best case of lowering emissions, we have to help people adapt. Today, we're announcing the launch of the first action track of the Global Commission on Adaptation, focused on food and agriculture. Over the next year, the Commission will focus on scaling up support to farmers in 5 areas, including expanding coverage of digital advisory services, expanding access to farmer finance and insurance, adopting innovations in ecological practices, and implementing policies which incentivize resilience. The final area is increasing investment in R&D and doubling the investment in the CGIAR system. The CG system hosts the world's largest and most advanced network of crop breeders, and it prioritizes the need of smallholder farmers while helping all farmers in the world. Investment in CGIAR has proven to be highly cost-effective, generating returns of up to $17 for every dollar invested, with significant economic benefits for both producers and consumers. But major financial commitments are needed to help the CGA system develop new climate-smart innovations that can help farmers adapt to increasing weather variability and more frequent climate shocks and stressors. Today, I'm happy to announce a number of new commitments. A coalition that includes the European Commission, Netherlands, UK, World Bank, Switzerland, and Sweden has promised to deliver over $791 million to support efforts to help smallholder farmers adapt to climate change. Additionally, Germany is committing to build resilience of an additional 60 million smallholder farmers. These commitments include $652 million over 3 years for a range of agriculture research and development initiatives carried out across the CG system and include significant increases in support. As part of this total, our foundation is pledging $310 million over the next 3 years for CG. We will increasingly support the CG shared agenda to tackle climate change and make food production in the developing world more productive. While important, these commitments are just the first installment towards achieving the Commission's recommendation of doubling the CG budget. We must do more to help smallholder farmers build resilience in the face of climate change, and I urge all governments present to continue what more they can do to support this critical institution over the next 12 months. The World Bank has been a great partner in this, and I know Dave Malpass has been a big supporter of that, so I thank him for his commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bill Gates. Well, David Malpass from the World Bank, for people who do experience the impact of climate disaster, as we were saying earlier, the most important thing by the World Bank and others to provide 500 million poor people with insurance coverage. Thank you.
Thank you. But let me first begin by commending Bill for his work and efforts on the adaptation agenda. The boost to CGIAR is especially welcome, and we're proud to support this effort. As we, the World Bank Group, seeks to end extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity, we aim to achieve these goals in a sustainable way. In the face of extreme weather events, we want to support countries and economies to be better prepared. I've seen firsthand how the early finance can help communities get ahead of disasters. Earlier this year, I visited Mozambique shortly after Cyclone Idai hit the region. Within days of the cyclone hitting, the government had dispersed $9 million to support its response and recovery efforts. That early financing is very important. It was part of a $90 million World Bank loan that was related to resilience. Funding for the Global Risk Financing Facility, or GRIF, helps governments design cyclone insurance against events like this. The GRIF is an innovative new facility that is helping countries around the world scale up financial solutions for situations like this. The GRIF is helping to boost resilience at all levels of the economy, at the macro level to build better buffers, at the mid-level to get firms back into action quickly, and at the micro level to protect households, assets, and livelihoods. I was in Mozambique and saw that those port facilities, those cities on the coast that had good buffers, were able to get back into business quickly and begin supporting the people that were really hardest hit by the cyclone. And more resources, public and private, are being committed to support expansion of this work to additional countries. For example, we're pleased to support the INSU Resilience Goals Partnership and its vision 2025 to scale up ambition for risk financing and build resilience for the poor and vulnerable. Germany has just pledged an additional 20 million euros, and the UK pledged 90 million pounds to further expand risk finance programs to many countries. And the private insurance industry has pledged to mobilize $5 billion until 2025 under the umbrella of the Insurance Development Forum. As the likelihood of disasters becomes more predictable, we need to help countries make their ability to respond more predictable as well. I'd like to thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much indeed, Mr. Malpass, and thank you to all our presenters. Thank you so much. Right, so His Excellency General Prayut Chan-o-cha. Prime Minister, as you're making your way in, I'd just like to say that climate change, of course, is one of the challenges that Thailand and the ASEAN region are facing. So we'd like to know what ASEAN's plans to achieve the region's potential are, whilst at the same time reducing their emissions and adapting to the impacts of climate change. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President of the General Assembly, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, today I have the honor to deliver this. ASEAN welcomes the convening of the Climate Action Summit today and commends the SG for his leadership in addressing the climate change issue. Today, these disasters are happening, whether it be land, air. The temperature is increasing and it is affecting everyone, whether it be flood or drought. ASEAN is how our peoples are affected by the climate change in low-lying coasts and river plains. Increased impacts of climate change have threatened the region's economic and social progress. Therefore, we have strived to strengthen our resilience by implementing both climate change mitigation and adaptation measures. We, ASEAN, is committed to be actively involved in global climate action at all levels. Globally, ASEAN strongly supports efforts under the UNFCCC. All of ASEAN member states are parties to the Paris Agreement and all have communicated their NDCs. Regionally, ASEAN has been implementing strategic measures under the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community Blueprint 2025 to realize a sustainable climate and a resilient community. ASEAN stresses the learning process of how to coexist happily with the environment. Our key targets include 1. Energy transition. ASEAN has exceeded its energy efficiency target, reducing energy intensity by more than 21.9% compared to 2005, which is well ahead of its 2020 target. It will also continue to work towards long-term target to reduce energy intensity by 30% within 2025 and also increase renewable energy mix by 23% also by 2025. 2. Land transport. ASEAN aims to reduce average fuel consumption of new light-duty vehicles sold in ASEAN by 26% between 2015 and 2025. It will also introduce and strengthen fiscal policy measures based on fuel economy or CO2 emissions at national levels and promote adoption of national fuels consumption for light-duty vehicles, striving for a regional standard in the long term. ASEAN stresses direct linkages between climate action and all means of implementation, such as capacity building, technology transfer, and financial support. Today is an opportunity for developed countries